I watched Joe Biden's press conference. I sat there and watched the whole thing from beginning to end because I do the news and I had to basically absorb that news. What I saw was basically what I see every time I watch either Jen Psaki or Ned Price or whoever these people are, the dim bulbs that they have sitting in the White House press corps asking weird, soft questions that sometimes hint at stuff but can never really get at it or say it in a way that people can entirely understand what is taking place, and they're pointing out the hypocrisy. It seems to be few and far between. There may be one person there pointing it out. But oftentimes, when they're saying things, the level of propaganda is so thick that they say things that can be immediately impeached by other things that they've said. And yet, it seems like the media either doesn't want to do it, don't believe that their job is to hold these guys accountable so they are buddies so they can talk about their socks and stuff like that, as opposed to get into the business of challenging the government of the United States. But that seemed to be just replicated when they finally got the opportunity to talk to Joe Biden. This wasn't, let's talk about America's agenda. Let's get to, brass tacks in regards to what Joe Biden said he was going to do versus what Joe Biden is doing and how Joe Biden is going to get those things accomplished. And what does the American public think about the various things that he's doing? What are the bread and butter things that are going to directly affect the American public, and why have those things not been done? Or when will those things be done? That should be a press conference. Especially when 500,000 people died from COVID, especially when 30 million people were infected with that disease, and when that number is entirely, completely related to government intransigence. I don't care if you want to make the argument that Trump was at the helm. It was still the government of the United States. He was at the helm of the government of the United States. And those 500,000 people, 550,000 at this point, that dropped dead in 1 year was a direct result of the actions of this government. For the press to not get that context, meaning you may ask about the COVID vaccine, but you don't seem to get the context that there are real people that are hurting, not just at the border, in the crisis at the border, but also throughout the entirety of the country. And the repetitive tone deafness, not to mention soft questioning, it's tone deaf. It's out of whack. Like, for example, this is not press conference. This is something else, but I just kind of want to make a point.
Right now in Missouri, medical marijuana is legal.
Yes.
In Illinois, medical marijuana and adult use marijuana are legal. Missouri probably going toward adult use as well, yet it's still a Schedule I drug on the federal level. Should that be changed? Should it be done away with?
It should be changed to a Schedule II drug. It should not be. We should move in the direction to make sure it's not a criminal offense. It's a civil offense. Number one. Anything, in fact, that any conviction at all for marijuana, now or in the future or in the past, which your record should be wiped clean. It's not something that is going to send anybody to jail. The reason, and so I support states, in fact, who have already legalized. I'd instruct my departments to not enforce the federal law, but there is evidence that we have to do some more study on the impact on mental acuity. That's, to use your phrase, and so I would legalize, I would decriminalize, and I would provide for the ability of the researchers to get in and make sure we got it right this time.
Last question.
Marijuana. Legalization of marijuana. New York has basically pushed through, is going to legalize. Virginia has started selling. Apparently, they opened up a pot store. Think of the number of people that get arrested for pot each year. Think of the skew. This 4 times more likely for African Americans to get arrested for pot as opposed to their white counterpart. This is affected all throughout America, and there may be more states that are basically open, but you have basically part of the country that is still locking people up for smoking a plant. More importantly, more apropos, locking people up, whereas a state across, the person can get high. One house, dude takes a bong hit, perfectly legal. One house over, dude takes a bong hit, he's going to jail with a cop. You're breaking the law! You're breaking the law! It's a big deal for many of the people that have records that want to be expunged. It's a big deal for many of the people that don't want to be harassed by cops because they want to take a bong hit. And I will tell you this, alcohol is worse than pot. I would rather be around a stoner any day of the week as opposed to an aggressive, angry alcoholic. Just look at cops. How is this not a valid question for Joe Biden? Joe Biden got 5 people were fired in Biden's administration and kicked out because of pot use. Now, understand what Joe Biden said there. He said, I am going to instruct my federal authorities not to enforce that. And I want all of these records wiped clean. Well, if that's true, if they're not going to enforce it and the records are wiped clean, then the fact that the people smoked pot previously should be irrelevant. And yet, they no longer have a job. It doesn't matter if it's more or less stringent than what it used to be. Those people still lost their jobs. And you had the complete and absolute authority to not kick them out of their jobs. More importantly, is what I really wished a reporter would say, Mr. President, Ehrlichman, the gentleman that used to work for Richard Nixon, one of his cronies, one of his crooks, was talking about the reason that they created the drug laws. You want to know what it was really about? He asked with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had little left to protect. The Nixon administration in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. If that's true, Joe Biden, which it is, he admitted to that, how do you justify not immediately changing the scheduling of marijuana in the way that you said you were going to change the scheduling? When can people expect you to do that? When can people expect you to expunge the records? Do you think the Republicans are going to go along with you on that? And if you don't think Republicans are going to go along with you on that, why did you say that? And you have the power to change the scheduling of the drug all by yourself. When will you take the opportunity to do that? And will that be a failed promise like the $15 an hour minimum wage? That's a valid question. He's not going to like that question, but it's a valid question. And it should bite, because the fact of the matter is all of those people that didn't get the $15 an hour are taking the bite from Joe Biden failing them. Yeah, the press conference was a snoozer, uninspiring, low energy, and the media, honestly, need to up their game. Welcome. Damn it. Welcome to the soapbox. Yeah, there we are. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to do it. So I'm going to just blow through a few of these, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on these, but it's aggravating to watch something like this and realize that the American public, if they're watching it, they're thinking to themselves, how does this apply to me? Because most of it didn't. Which is kind of my point about making it saying tone deaf. The American public has lost so many people at this point. And so many people were hurt by the COVID and the response to COVID. This is supposed to be a time of rebuilding of sorts, of the American public being the focus as opposed to the plutocrats. And I don't necessarily entirely think that has been the focus. Joe Biden had absolute authority to do whatever he wanted. He needed to assert himself, yes, but he had the power to do it, and he just didn't use it. And there's questions about if he even had the ability of speech and mind to be able to articulate himself, even if he cared enough to do so. I'm going to go through a few of these. So let's start here. This is Joe Biden.
Follow up, Mr. President. Can your presidency be a success if you can't make progress on those four challenges: climate change, immigration reform, gun control, voting rights?
Well, I plan on making progress on all of them, but that's going to be for the American people to decide. I think, I doubt whether, maybe you did, maybe others did. I thought, many of you thought there was no possibility of my getting the plan I got passed without any Republican votes. Pretty big deal. Got passed.
That's not a big deal. And the very follow-up should be, Mr. President, you literally negotiated yourself down with your own party. Why are you considering that this mind-blowing win? The only people that were in the room were Democrats. You didn't get any Republican votes. You had 51 votes in order to get it through using budget reconciliation. You could have always gotten rid of the parliamentarian. You could have even included the $15 an hour minimum wage within the context of that bill if you wanted to get rid of the parliamentarian in order to do it. You chose not to. So when you point that out to me, Mr. President, can't you see how the American people, despite you passing the bill, can consider it still a broken promise? They would never say that. They would never say anything like that. You can change that question around however you want to change that question around. But in his response here, you should make the point clear to him that you were negotiating with members of your party only, and they still negotiated you down. And you did not assert yourself in the least to articulate what you wanted in that bill, meaning the $15 an hour. You gave it up in a heartbeat, in a wisp of a moment. Wisp of a moment. That should be pointed out. That's a big deal. I mean, there's multiple questions that should be pointed out. You keep mentioning unions, Joe Biden. Unless he was screaming, unions built America. Unions built America. That's pretty much, the only time when he would start screaming in the mic and stuff like that when he felt confident. But, Mr. President, you keep saying unions. Are you going to back the PRO Act? I mean, the AFL-CIO and many of the other unions, including the people of Amazon, are really backing this particular policy as a way of really exploding unions throughout the United States, something that you personally said you wanted to do. So, can we get you to say that you're going to back the PRO Act? And for that matter, can we get a timeline on when you're going to start pushing this to get this through? That's a valid question. The $2,000, you effectively negotiated down with your own party and didn't fight for this campaign promise. Do you think the American public are going to see that as a problem, especially since 17 million more didn't get access to that cash? It's a valid question. The Uyghurs, what are you using to base this claim on? And does it bother you that the United States has killed more Muslims than the Uyghurs, or that the Chinese are supposed to be basically genociding? Meaning, at what point is it genocide? Well, we've killed more than 2 million Muslims, and I can rack it up for you if you want, including babies, 500,000 children. At which point is this comparison valid? Aren't we somewhat of a hypocrite on this? Nobody would ask that question. It would not even fall into the American context to ask that question, even though it's true. Mr. President, you saying you wanted to work with Russia and you're calling Vladimir Putin a killer. You don't think it's a little weird that on the day of the Iraq war, a war that you pushed, you backed, that killed 1 million Iraqis, on the day of the Iraq war, you call him a killer? How does that, aren't you affected by that also, considering that you pushed for that war? Don't you share some of the blame and the blood on you? Or is it just other people's actions and other people's decisions that can influence the opinion of them? But your actions, see, somehow you are separate and distinct from those actions. So despite the fact that you would push for those particular policies that would get all of those people killed in the Middle East, and you would knowingly do so, despite the fact that you killed 22 Muslims when you first got into the country by doing an illegal airstrike in a foreign country that was not on the border of Oklahoma, how is it that you can kill 22 people within the first, 30-some days in office, but somehow that death, those killings, don't tarnish your image in the way that you're impugning Vladimir Putin. Just trying to understand. He was asked, or Jen Psaki was asked, is MBS a killer? And Dave was like, yeah, we don't want to answer that. He had a guy deboned, and you can't answer that. That gets across a certain degree of dishonesty if you can't say yes to that question. If the $15 an hour, will that be your greatest betrayal? And leave it like that. And if he says anything back, explain you had all the power in the world to get that through. The House put it in their bill. Joe Manchin took it out of the bill. You in no way put your foot in Joe Manchin's ass to ensure that the American public was going to get the $15 an hour minimum wage. You wouldn't do it. And so, yeah, that is your betrayal. You had the power to do it. You didn't do it. That is a betrayal, correct? Let him answer. And then drill the point home how he had all the power in the world to get. They would never do that. Understand what I'm saying? These questions are directly related to the American public, to the living standard, to the things that he said he was going to do in that office that were going to affect the American public. Modest, diminutive things in comparison to 550,000 people dying over the course of a year. But still, things that he said he was going to do. The Senate is already a minority institution. California gets 2 votes. Iowa gets 2 votes. California, if it was a nation, would be the 5th largest in the world. Why do you believe that there needs to be added power to gum up the works? Other countries around the world with parliaments don't have this intransigence that you're basically sticking to your system. They have a system where the leading government rules just fine. And they don't even have this kind of minority body in the same way that we do. What's the issue here? What's the issue? The U.S. policy of pushing allies to not use our drugs, to not use drugs from China and Russia, Brazil, for example, has led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. Now, of course, Bolsonaro is an idiot, so there's that. But keep in mind, they wanted to use Chinese medicine. The United States pushed them not to use vaccines from China. China has given out 40% of its vaccines that they've made. The U.S. has given out 0. And that Brazil, when having the opportunity to get the vaccine, said no because the United States pushed it to say no. Brazil is going up to 300,000 people dead as a result of the virus. Mr. President, does it bother you that the foreign policy that the United States has been using has basically been causing a large number of deaths by convincing vassal states to not use the Chinese and the Russian drug out of American foreign policy interests? That's a valid question. Why is that not valid? People are dying in Brazil and the U.S. is hoarding its AstraZeneca and its other vaccines. They would never ask these. I'm trying to give examples because I want to get across how bad this press conference is and how tone deaf and out of sync it is with the American populace. There's a UFO task force that's coming up. And in that task force, the congressmen and whatnot have been talking and been giving information to the press. Former DNI Ratcliffe, who was looking at the files, was very clear that there's a ton of them. Luis Elizondo, the guy who was running the Black Budget Project, has been talking about alien technology. So it seems like there's something that doesn't seem to be of this planet. And if we're going to get a UFO report or UAP report, are you going to help with the declassification or the declassifying to ensure that the public can get a fair hearing? And will you push to open the various files? Will you push to ensure that the public can see what's behind the scenes on this issue? Nobody even asked that, despite the fact that the UFO task force is coming up. And again, I keep making the point that imagine for the moment if that task force said we're not alone. That task force has the potential to fucking change reality on planet Earth going forward in perpetuity forever. And none of the reporters thought it was of interest or importance to ask the goddamn question. Instead, they want to go to repetitive questions on the border. Let's keep going because, again, there is more. I'm only going to do 2 or 3 of these. Let's skip the filibuster. Let's see. Skip that one. China and U.S. competition. Let's go to that one. So this one is 47. because this one is really interesting. Because for the first time, what it sounds like is the U.S. is competing with China, not the other way around. And Joe Biden is reading off metrics. I've already told you they've given out 40% of their vaccines, so talk about diplomacy. And on top of that, the investments that they were making around the world, they were investing trillions over the course of X number of years. For the Belt and Road Initiative, that's called diplomacy. That's ingratiating yourself to other countries by not dropping bombs, by not using this kind of iron fist. We're going to take, XYZ. No, they've used a certain degree of open-endedness in regards to their relationships. We're not going to push. We just want business and friendly ties. Biden is talking about the stuff, bridges that have collapsed or are collapsing, infrastructure that is falling apart, the conditions of America and Americans. I mean, he gave $1,400. Like, $1,400 is a huge amount. I mean, that pays rent, and not even rent. It doesn't even pay our rent, for God's sake. And my wife didn't even get hers yet. So it's not like a situation where people even got them in case there was an emergency, and that emergency has been going on for months. That's a separate issue. I guess Biden sounds like we are competing with China, not the other way around. And it sounds like this at multiple points through this. Let's hear him puff his chest out and talk about China and the Uyghurs. And again, nobody asked him, Joe Biden, we're talking about 1 million Uyghurs that the claim is being put out that are being basically, I guess, killed off. I mean, if you're saying genocide. The United States killed 500,000 babies, kids, in Iraq during Clinton sanctions. Madeleine Albright said it herself that it was valid. It was necessary. George Bush, despite the fact that it was supposedly necessary with Albright, George Bush comes in and still feels the need to kill 1 million Iraqis. This goes into 500,000 Syrians, tens of thousands of Libyans, tens of thousands of Iranians from the sanctions that were basically put on. If we've killed this many Muslims, which is a flat fact, true, and I'm not even including the drone wars, the number of bombs, 26,000 bombs in this last year. If that's true, how are we pointing to China and the Uyghurs? And I got to be honest, I don't even buy this. Only because this sounds like U.S. foreign policy stuff that these guys are doing, almost like they were doing with Afghanistan and the Mujahideen. But whatever, I'm just making the point that the hypocrisy of it seems to be lost on the various media outlets.
The thing that I admire about dealing with Xi is he understands. He makes no pretense about not understanding what I'm saying any more than I do him. I pointed out to him no leader can be sustained in his position or her position unless they represent the values of the country. And I said, and
this is how comically inept he is. A leader can represent the values of a country even if that leader wasn't democratically chosen. Let me repeat that. Look, there is no God directing this. If your society comes together and is perfectly fine with having a person of a particular party and have a group lead it in that way, if the society is not bitching about it en masse, that's on them. It's their choice. It's not for me to say what the Chinese government should or shouldn't look like. Whether he has a bone in his body or a democratic bone in his body is almost irrelevant to the point. Their society is their society. It's none of our business. If you want to compete with them, fair enough. But at this point, it looks like you're losing that particular competition from the standpoint of winning friends and from the standpoint of just competence and expedience. I mean, understand how ridiculous that is. It doesn't matter if he wants to run a government in that way. They have been running this government for God knows how long. Clearly, it works. The U.S. is trying to find ways to destabilize that government, be it with Hong Kong or be it with this Uyghur stuff. And so this argument that it doesn't work and everything else is belied by the fact that it is working. A person and a leader can represent the values of a country even if that leader wasn't elected. It's true. And I don't even know why he doesn't know that. You can be within the context of what the public wants. especially if you pull 200 million people out of poverty, they're probably going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's keep going. I mean, this is one of the stupidest answers.
Mr. President, as I've told you before, Americans value the notion of freedom. America values human rights. We don't always live up to our expectations, but it's a value system. We are founded on that principle.
What does it matter if it's a value system if you don't live up to it? And it's not always, it's never live up to it. I could go down the marks and nobody is going to bring this up either. Nobody is going to say, Mr. President, we often don't live up to those values. I mean, what was the Iraq War? I mean, for God's sake, you were pushing for that war. I mean, it was last month. I mean, is a war of aggression, a war for weapons of mass destruction, is that American values? Is going into Syria American values? Is staying in Iraq when they tell us to leave American values? I mean, it seems like we've been blowing countries up left and right. New York Times said we were trying to knock over the government of Syria, and so did Donald Trump. He said we were trying to knock over the government of Syria. We spent $1 billion for that. Is that American values? You are right now pretending that Juan Guaido is president of a country to which he is probably about to be prosecuted. Is that American values? What about backing the coup in Bolivia? What about backing the putting Lula in jail? Are those things American values? And if they're not American values, then what the fuck does it matter about American values? I hope you understand what I'm saying. The shadow or this image of yourself, this mirage of yourself, doesn't matter if you're not living up to it or if you don't even try to live up to it. Human rights is what they use to hit other countries on. That's it. They don't use that for Yemen. They don't use that for Saudi Arabia. They don't use that for Turkey. They don't use that for any of their dictators in some of the Gulf countries. No, only for the countries they don't particularly like. Let's keep going. I mean, this answer is annoying the shit out of me, but let's keep going.
And as long as you and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights, we are going to continue in an unrelenting way to call to the attention of the world.
Now, let's be clear. Under this model, Israel doesn't violate human rights. When they are murdering Palestinians left and right, 80%, 2,000 people killed and 80%. Or recently, where they were shooting people in the knees and the groin and in the head to make the point when these people were coming back for the right of return or protesting. That doesn't get called out, even though that is violent, that is bloody, that is deadly, and that is murderous. It is. That's not a violation of human rights abuses, according to Joe Biden. China is the issue. When Joe Biden is murdering these Muslims with these drone strikes, or for that matter, the wars, or the toppling of the governments, does he believe that those are in the interests of human rights? I mean, is he utterly insane? And how weak and ridiculous and soft, utterly inept and incompetent, especially in the context of what the American public needs to know. You realize that the American public, all things being equal, if you gave it the information necessary, would probably say, all things being equal, I don't want to send my kid off to war. I think they are racist from the standpoint of the way they look at other countries, where they think those countries are lesser. So if our troops are going in and killing and shooting and maiming, that we think that that's perfectly okay. That's true. By the same token, all things being equal, though, I think they would rather that the troops stay at home. But they don't get that context. Meaning they would never get the context that North Korea is complaining about the United States doing missile drills or doing invasion drills with South Korea. North Korea continues to complain about it. The U.S. media would never bring that up in regards to a question to Joe Biden. The American public would get the impression that the United States is trying to deal with somebody who's just firing off rockets, missing the point that he's firing off rockets because the U.S. is pretending to invade his country. I'm making the point that the missing context matters. And the missing context is something that is just persistent in U.S. media. It makes it wrong. It gives it a false impression. And it gives people who are looking at it thinking to themselves, yes, I am informed. You were given an impression to give you a preconceived point of view, with you thinking like you came in a rove, arrived to that point of view. You didn't arrive to anything. You were given a point of view. And you were given the constituents to have you work in a particular direction, dropping the context that would allow you to look at that from a larger point of view. They do this constantly. This is what annoys the shit out of me, and is why I've started watching the presidential, the White House briefings. Joe Biden is doing it here, and nobody will call him on it.
And make it clear what's happening. And he understood that. I made it clear that no American president, at least one did, but no American president ever backed down from speaking out of what's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in country. That's who we are. The moment.
It's funny, Joe Biden was in an administration that had Guantanamo Bay, and we, who we are, were torturing and dragging people off of streets for rendition. Think about that. Basically, burlap sacking people. Many of the other people, some of the people that we were burlap sacking and torturing, breaking their bodies. Some of the people dying in custody as they beat the shit out of them in black sites. That was us. That's what we were doing. Our values. So it's just astonishing. That's all. No one in the press room, either they don't know or they just don't tell you. Which one is it? And which one is more problematic? Meaning, is this a blind spot? And if this is a blind spot, and this is a blind spot that's basically shared among all of the press, do they know what I just said? Meaning, do they know about the black sites? Do they know about the renditions? Do they know about Obama's kill list that kept getting longer and longer, where the president would basically say he will pick off people in order to whack? American values, racist values. The racist value to believe that you have the nerve, the cosmic authority. And it's not even cosmic authority. That stuff is taken if you had the power to take it. No more, no less. That's all it is. It's not good, bad, right, wrong, at least from their context. Power in and of itself allows itself to function. It is a gravity amongst itself. And with the vassal states that are willing to back up the United States in each of these acts, as horrific as they are, the U.S. goes out as if it has no clothes and that nobody knows that it doesn't have any clothes on. Everybody knows. If the press knows and don't say, they're lying to you. Period. They're giving you a false perspective of reality. If they don't know, then they're incompetent and they shouldn't be doing that goddamn job. The American public needs to know. They need people to point out, well, what about the black sites? There needs to be somebody to say that, to point out that, are those also American values? To point out what was taking place in his own administration, the coup that took place in Honduras when Zelaya, basically, the president in Honduras now talking about, I'm going to put cocaine in the nose of every gringo. Is that guy a partner? Well, at one point, he was a partner with Joe Biden. Now, who knows what he is? But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that in this situation, over and over and over again, Joe Biden says things that is impeachable, that can be nailed for him being a hypocrite, and it never once comes up. And the main questions that look like would be pertinent to the American public for their life, limb, for the things that Joe Biden said, just weren't relevant enough to come up for them. I said this was going to happen because I said none of them are making $15 an hour. And because none of them are making $15 an hour, they don't give a shit about the people who are making $15 an hour. Those people were heroes when we needed them to put their lives on the line. But now that the deaths are going down, they're not heroes anymore, despite the fact that a large share of the 500,000 that died were black, were poor, were Hispanic. And yes, many of white also, especially since whites make up more of the population. I'm just making the point that a large disproportionate share of those people were poor and were out there serving our food, delivering our groceries, working in those facilities that basically ended up offing many of them. And yet, when they got the opportunity to ensure that they weren't on a starvation wage, failed. And the media didn't give a shit about those people enough to question them on it. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Make sure you hit the subscription button, guys. YouTube has been doing really weird stuff. They have been, look, the views and subs to this channel have basically dropped precipitously. At this point, I think I've lost over 100 subs or something to that effect. And this has been something that's been happening over month, where it goes through these spots where people just drop off. And the number of views drop in half, etc., etc. Apparently, this has happened to all of the channels. Yeah, so definitely make sure you're subscribed. And yeah, like, share, subscribe, and like we said, even $1 helps. Thanks all. I'll see you guys actually maybe later tonight, depending on how I feel, if I'm wide awake. But back in a moment.